Hello and welcome to Up Your Wine Game today. I've got a glass of wine in front of me, but we're not going to be actually talking about a specific wine that I'm tasting. I get a lot of comments from YouTube, and when they're not about, can you tell me something that tastes like Camus without spending 80 bucks? Enough of that. A lot of questions are basically, who are you? And I realize that with all these videos that I've done and podcasts or whatnot, I've never really given my backstory on who the hell I am and why I am talking about these wines and if I'm even qualified to talk about these wines, and so be it. So I'm going to spend the next 5-10 minutes kind of giving my story about who the hell I am, and we'll go from there and how I kind of got into this racket, into this business, and we'll go from there. But anyway, my story probably is similar to a lot of people who are in the wine business. They found a passion for wine early on, and then they figured out a way to make a living being in the business. But mine, I kind of got into it a little bit from the side. So I've always had a passion for food ever since I was young. Something about watching people cook and eating and the whole bit has always been intriguing to me. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Good food was always on the table. Had the opportunity to travel quite a bit with my family overseas, and little stories of me darting off into the kitchen in restaurants in Spain and Italy and whatnot, and then the chef would bring me out on his shoulders. So there's something about being in the kitchen that has always been intriguing to me. But kind of in high school, that enchantment with food grew even more because I was a wrestler in high school. So there were several months a year when I really couldn't eat a lot, and I used to fantasize about certain food. That's a true story. So, and then I thought about, perhaps I went to a couple of cooking schools in high school, Chinese cooking school, French cooking school. So I thought about eventually wanting to go into the restaurant business. So I ended up at Cornell University School of Hotel Administration. That was the name of it back then, with the idea thinking maybe I want to be a chef or a restaurateur. Halfway through Cornell, I did a semester abroad in Italy, in Florence, studying the language, right? So back then, there used to be this thing called the wine saver. And so when I was up at Cornell, I had the opportunity to taste some of the local wines at Finger Lakes, beautiful area. The wines were good, not great, but what did I know? I was just learning. But a buddy of mine at Cornell invited me to go to a wine tasting down in Ithaca. It was at a hotel, a bunch of older people, and they brought wine, and I remember we tasted white Burgundy. And I didn't know what it was. It was like one of the first wines I've tasted, and I just remember thinking, wow, these wines are really freaking good. But at the time, I had no idea. Fast forward, used to go to the store there, try some new things. But it was really this semester in Italy that did it for me. So I bought this book called Burton Anderson's Guide to Italian Wine, little tiny book. And then when I was in Florence, there was still remains to this day, Enoteca Alessi, which is right in the Centro Storico of Florence, right near the Duomo. And store, you go in up top and there's candy and all kind of stuff, and then you go down the cellar and there's just laid out by region of Italy all of Italy's greatest wines. And that was just like Disneyland for me. So I would literally go to class in the mornings, break for lunch, and then in the afternoon I would go to this wine store and look through this book and just read and identify labels and then try wines. And that was a real treat. And back then I had a wine saver. It just looked like a little green, like bomb, little nitrogen thing, and you could tap off. It was like a Corvin before it was Corvin. And I had that in my little apartment in Florence, and I remember I would get Ciacci Piccolomini. Their Rosso di Montalcino was like friggin' 4,800 lira at the time. It's like $4. And this wine was mind-boggling to me. It was just like, holy moly. So anyway, after 5 months living there and tasting a bunch of wines, I got back and I was like, you know what? I want to be in the wine business. So the last 2 years at Cornell, before I graduated, was a lot of tasting wine. Like a lot of buying wine, a lot of drinking wine, a lot of tasting wine. Wine was on the table when I cooked. I cooked a lot. So dinner, there was always wine on the table. Back then, you could get the Castello di Diablo in the Magnum for like $6. Cosimo Taurino Salice Salentino was $4.99, $5.99. So with Valtellina, I was drinking Nebbiolo out of Mag for like $8. So, I didn't know what a deal, those wines were, but just anything I could get my hands on, boom, that was it. So anyway, wanted to get into the wine business after I graduated, sent out a bunch of cover letters, and, there was no resume. I was a friggin' student to a bunch of Italian wine importers. If you can think of them, I sent one out. I got 2 responses. One was from Banfi, because Banfi, the Mariani family, donated quite a bit of money to Cornell and to the hotel school. They interviewed me. They were very gracious to do so, but the only opportunity was for a rep position in Boston. Was not equipped or, had the experience to do that. The only other response was from a company called Winebow. Back then, they were a small relative startup in New York and New Jersey with some, interests in other markets outside of New York and New Jersey. I went down to interview with him. The owner of the company, one of the founders at the time, Leonardo Locascio, interviewed me. He was excited about the fact that I was excited about Italian wine and that I spoke Italian, and I went to work for them. I was kind of a jack of all trades at Winebow, like literally sending faxes. Yes, there were still faxes. This is pre-internet, right? So I was still sending faxes, setting up for tastings, running sales reports. And so at the time, I literally had my fingers in all sorts of things there at Winebow, and it was an amazing experience. I would translate for suppliers when they came in, shuttle them around. There was a time when Cosimo Taurino, which was probably Winebow's biggest winery, at the time they made a Salice Salentino. They still make a Salice Salentino. But he came to town and he was going to go work the Boston market. So when Mimo came to town, I borrowed Leonardo's car. It was a Porsche 924 back then with a Black Panther sticker in the window. And Mimo and I drove from New York to Boston. Of course, what could possibly go wrong other than, well, first of all, Cosimo wanted to stop for breakfast. So breakfast for Italians, meat, cheese, bread, something simple. So what do? I'm like, okay, what are we gonna do for breakfast for this guy from Italy? So I stop and get an egg McMuffin, right? You want cheese, egg, bread, meat. And I remember he was sitting in the passenger seat. He started opening, like dissecting this thing, like how could or would anybody possibly ever eat this for breakfast? So he was a little put out, but he kept his humor about him. And then about 5 miles after he basically put the bag on the floorboard of the car, I get pulled over for speeding. And, Mimo's trying to figure out like why'd you get pulled over? And I'm like, well, I'm doing the speed. I'm going over the speed limit, which in Italy, it's like I was probably going 78 miles an hour in a 55, whatever. But, here's a black guy driving a Porsche, up near Boston. Go figure. So anyway, got a ticket. And, but, that just little opportunities like that were absolutely fantastic. Got lost taking Franco Bernabé back to the airport from New Jersey. Lost in my Jeep. But there were all kind of adventures there. But it was a great experience. And then I wanted to, like a lot of my friends were in New York City, I wanted to get some retail experience. So then I was at Winebow for a year, and then I went to Sherry Lehman Wines and Spirits in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. I was there for a year. Again, amazing experience working in that retail environment, seeing some, just mind-blowing. People would call up and, say, hey, this is, I'm not going to call names, but this is somebody very, very wealthy, Mrs. Wealthy person, and I'm having lunch for 8 to 10 of my friends, and I just need to get some wines for lunch. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, like some Pinot Grigio or whatever. And she's like, well, no, just send like a case of Dom Perignon, send a case of, well, what Bordeaux do you like? And I'm like, well, Yeah, send a case of that. Send a case of it. I mean, $8,000, $10,000 literally of wine. And there's like, if there's anything left over, we'll just, we'll just, use it later. But eye-opening experience, but really got to see not only retail at that level, but just, taste a lot of amazing wines. Good crew of people there who everybody there was really enthusiastic about wine, and it was a great environment. So was there a year, and then I wanted to go see how wine was actually produced. So went back to Italy for 5 months, bought a little used Fiat, and drove from the south of Italy up to Piedmont. I stayed with Cosimo Taurino and his family for 2 weeks during harvest. An amazing experience, but you have to imagine, and this is where the experience I've had is somewhat invaluable, to have 5 months, literally to drive from vineyard to vineyard, from region to region, and speak to the people who are actually making the wine, right? So, everybody from Cosimo Taurino to Nicodemo and Antonio Librandi had lunch, in their kitchen. When I say had lunch, this is like in their kitchen during harvest. These people consider themselves farmers. Their hands tell the story, right? So, Domenico Clerico, rest in peace. He's like, yeah, come in. We walk the vineyards. Come in, have lunch with me and my wife, and let's talk shop. Let's talk wine, and laughing and joking. And that was with, Elio Altari, Luciano Sandrone, like you name it, Giuseppe Mazzocolin, Sergio Manetti, which to this day I have not had the experience of having lunch with Sergio Manetti of Le Pergole Torte. A lunch where it was starting to snow. This was in the fall of '87. No, fall of '92. Shitty year, a lot of rain. And just pull up to his winery, starting to snow, fireplace going. He's got these bistecca alla Fiorentina that are massive, like 2 of these just big Whopper steaks sitting next to the fireplace, like just salted and peppered. His son is getting wine. We do like 3 or 4 vintages of Le Pergole Torte. And just that setting, to have so simple and to be in the presence of that guy and talk about his wines, literally these are experiences that, and I could just replicate stuff like that. I mean, just being up in Piedmont, going to visit Gaia's winery, tasting some of the wines, and then somebody at the winery sits me in a room and I'm tasting the wines and I'm taking notes, because I used to take copious notes on every wine I tasted. And then, Angelo Gaia comes in and I'm just like mortified, because I'm like, he's hero. And I'm like, this is like, it's Angelo Gaia, right? And this dude has eyes that are like laser beams. So I'm sitting there and he's just like, with this staccato voice, just asking me questions. And I'm just like, in my best Italian that I could muster, just answering back. Prince of a guy, but let me tell you, those eyes could drill holes in through concrete. But yeah, just, in every region, legends of the Italian wine industry. I was fortunate enough, to meet with them and to taste with them, and they, brought me into their homes, and just stunning experience. So kind of halfway through that trip, I met an exporter named Mark DeGrazia, who represented a lot of these wineries, a lot of the best wineries throughout Italy. He was leading kind of a little revolution in terms of how wine was made and marketed. He didn't have representation in Georgia. I went back to Atlanta after I left Italy and started importing wines. And basically my story from 1993, which is when I applied for the license, for the next 2023, we're talking 30 plus years. I've been in the import, distribution, or retail side of wine, of all wines, not just Italian wine, but of everything. So that's kind of my story. I've tasted a gazillion wines at this point. It's like a relational database. So when I taste, this is a little Aglianico. When I taste this, it's automatically like, okay, compare this to all the different Aglianicos you've had. How does it shape up? Is it typical? Is it better? Is it not? Is it different? And that's what I do every time I taste a wine. It really just goes into a little database in my brain, and poof, that's where we are. So again, if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments or hit me up at Todd at upyourwinegame.com. I also just did another podcast on cellaring wine that just released today. So if you have an interest, there are certain things you need to do. If you're thinking about laying some money into, buying some wines to collect in the whole bit, there are a couple things you need to do. Check out that podcast wherever you check out your podcast, because I've got some tips there so that you don't waste your time and or money with that. Anyway, until next time, be good, take care, and arrivederci.